Good evening, everyone. If you could all take your seats, please. So thank you very much for all being here in person. This feels like a transforming moment for all of us, I think. It's my great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you all on behalf of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and to this, which is the 14th annual Distinguished Lecture on the Arts of South and Southeast Asia. We're honored by the presence of a number of distinguished visitors this evening from New York consulates and from the United Nations. I want to thank you for your attendance. We're especially delighted this year to be partnering with the Office of the Consulate General of India here in New York and the Indo-American Arts Council in marking the 75th anniversary of Indian independence. I wish to personally thank Consul General of India, Randir Jaswal, for his commitment to promoting the appreciation of Indian culture here in New York in all its diversity, and the Indo-American Arts Council board members who are present with us this evening for their unstinting commitment to supporting Indian arts across New York. It is now my honor to invite Consul General Jaswal of the Indian Consulate, New York, to say a few words. Consul General, thank you.
Honorable Ambassadors and Consul Generals, distinguished Deputy Directors of the Met Museum, respected Mr. John Guy, Senior Curator, Met Museum, respected Professor Juhyung Ri, distinguished members of the Indian American community, distinguished guests, and distinguished visitors. Namaste to all of you. I warmly welcome you to this annual distinguished lecture on Gandhara art. This is being held as part of India at 75 celebrations, and I profusely thank the Met Museum, the Indo-American Arts Council, and others for their collaboration and support. India will be 75 years old as a modern nation on 15th August 2022, that is this year. For this reason, our engagement today is very special. It is also special for today is Holi, the festival of colors. I convey my warmest wishes to all of you on this occasion. The talk on Year 5 Buddha is intimately connected to the Indian month of Falgun, or the month when we celebrate Holi in India. And for that reason, the timing of this event is very well thought out. As part of India at 75, Amrit Mahotsav, the festival of our freedom, we have a series of programs coming up. I invite you to join us in these celebrations. The Indian civilization during the period of Gandhara art interacted extensively with the East and with the West. From the Indo-Gangetic Basin and the South, traders, merchants, monks, both Hindus and Buddhists, traveled far and wide, by sea to the East, to faraway lands, to Japan, to China, to Korea, and beyond, carrying the cargo of knowledge, thought, art, and culture, along with spices, silk, and more. In return, they brought back goods, stories, and tales of kings and queens, of ordinary people, and their daily chores. Similar was our interaction with the Western side, or on the Western side, with Central Asia and Arabia. Indian thought and culture traveled along the Silk Route, embracing communities and cultures. We, in turn, were influenced by ideas that came our way. This intermingling expressed itself in several ways, one of them being Gandhara art. Statues and sculptures of the Buddha came to be wrapped with drapes and hairlocks that spoke of Indo-Greek influence. The sharpness of artisans' chisel combined itself with ideas old and new to draw the vibrant canvas of Gandhara art. Our storyteller today, Professor Juhyung Ri, is a scholar who has deep knowledge of India's engagement to its east and to its west. And for that reason, he is as special as the subject itself. This conversation on Gandhara art is part of a continuum, part of the story of India-US cultural and intellectual engagement that travels back in time to the 18th century New England, where Unitarians, transcendentalists, and scholars, the likes of Ralph Emerson, John Howard, and Walt Whitman, who wanted to understand the philosophy of the Orient. Merchants from Salem, Boston, and Philadelphia traveled to India, bringing back goods and products, and among them, books on Vedanta, Bhagavad Gita, and more. This vibrant exchange continues with greater intent and meaning today, adding depth to our shared democratic values, bringing us ever closer as we celebrate freedom and independence today. Gandhara art goes back centuries, and so does our effort today to build stronger bridges of cultural understanding between the United States and India. We look forward to hearing Professor Juhyung Ri and his scholarship. And as we talk of Gandhara art and Year 5 Buddha, let us pray for peace and harmony in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Consul General, for those very insightful words as the world faces an uncertain future. It's now my privilege and pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Professor Juhyung Ri. A little biographical background: he took his PhD at University of California, Berkeley in 1991 and was appointed in 1992 to the University of Seoul National Museum, the premier university in South Korea, and serves there as Professor of Buddhist Art History in the Department of Archaeology and Art History. In 2002, he was awarded the prestigious Numata Visiting Professorship in Buddhist Studies at Berkeley. In 2012-13, was a research fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton. Professor Ri has served in many leading roles at the Seoul National University and associations, academic associations in Korea, including serving as the Dean of College of Humanities, President of the Korean Association of Art History, a member of the Cultural Heritage Council of the Government of South Korea. He currently serves as the President of the International Association of Buddhist Studies, the premier research forum for Buddhist studies globally. He's published widely on Buddhist art of Gandhara, particularly addressing questions of production centers, stylistic innovation, chronology, and dating in Gandharan Buddhist art. A number of major books devoted to Gandharan art, and a new work which is in preparation at the moment, an English language 2-volume work dedicated to Buddha images of Gandhara, which we all look forward to very much. Tonight we'll be privileged to be given a preview of some of his original thinking in bringing that he brings to many of the important questions central to our understanding of early Indian art, especially that of Gandhara and the Northwest. It is with great pleasure, therefore, that I invite Professor Juhyung Ri to deliver the 14th Distinguished Lecture on the Arts of South and Southeast Asia here at the Met. Professor Ri, thank you.
Thank you very much for kind introduction. I'm very much honored to be invited to give. I'm very much honored to be invited to give this lecture, and would like to thank the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Mr. John Guy for bringing me here. This is my first trip overseas since the pandemic breakout 2 years ago. It is a great pleasure that my first destination is New York, everyone's favorite city. I'm also delighted to find a number of old and good friends in the audience. In 1973, an advertisement for an extraordinary piece of Gandharan sculpture was posted in the journal Oriental Art. The piece was a small stele of a Buddha triad, about 60 centimeters high, consisting of a seated Buddha and 2 standing bodhisattvas, with 2 smaller figures between them, Brahma and Indra. The advertisement claimed that the work represents the miracle of Shravasti, a legendary theme from the Buddha's life, with which a similar triad type had been commonly identified. Its date was given as the 2nd century AD, as you can see here, although this is problematic, as I'll discuss shortly. The triad was advertised by Asia-Afrique, an antique shop run by a Belgian collector cum dealer, Claude Marteau, in Brussels. It was in his collections at the time, and thus came to be commonly called the Brussels Buddha. The triad is beautifully carved and remarkably well preserved. It is of the highest quality known in Gandharan sculpture. Furthermore, it is exceptionally valuable because of its dated inscription carved on the base, an extremely rare feature among Gandharan images. 2 specialists separately published articles on the inscription a year later. As you can see here, the inscription reads, in the year 5, on the 5th day of the month Falguna, as explained by the Consulate General, donation of the master of the 3 Pitakas, Buddhananda, made before the honoring of his mother and father who have passed on. The master of 3 Pitakas means a monk who is versed in 3 categories of Buddhist scriptures. The signs for the number 5 are clearly legible. I don't seem to have a pointer here. Pointer. Oh, pointer. I don't have a pointer. Okay. Anyhow, that's fine. The sign is something like the 9 in Roman script. So, thus we call the triad the year 5 Buddha in the title of this lecture. However, year 5 as a designation seems to unduly give weight to its dates, even when I'm discussing other aspects of the triad. Therefore, I'll use the phrase methili as well, although the triad is currently only on long-term loan to this museum. Apparently, for the next 10 years, no buyer emerged. Asian artworks were not yet such hot items for collectors in the period as they are now. And the so-called Gandharan art was known only to a narrow circle of art lovers in the West. However, it received renewed attention when it was shown in 2 separate exhibitions held from 1984 to 1986 in the US. I saw it in one of the exhibitions held in the Asia Society Galleries in New York in early 1986. But at the time, my knowledge about Gandharan art was limited. The situation in the world of Asian art changed dramatically in the intervening period. Greater interest in Asian art, including that of Gandhara, had emerged in the market. Also, there was more money in the market, partly accelerated by the rise of the global financial industry. Japan's bubble economy, with its inflated valuations of real estate and stock, led investors to seek out other new investments. Thus, Japanese collectors avidly purchased works of Gandharan art, which Japanese Buddhists have adored almost sentimentally as the origin of their traditional Buddhist art. Around 1990, the Brussels Buddha was sold to a new Buddhist sect in Japan by the name of Agon Shu, which acquired a number of pieces in Gandharan art. The triad remained in Japan for the next 3 decades, hidden from the public eye. In 2007, it was shown for the first time in Japan in an exhibition of Gandharan art held in Shizuoka, Japan, which included artworks from public and private Japanese collections. I was delighted to be able to examine it carefully, then with an expert eye, after many years of cherishing questions about this important piece. In 2020, it was again on the market and sold in the next year, exactly 1 year ago. The Agonshu seem to have sold off all their possessions of Gandharan art, though I have no knowledge of why the sect made the decision. As we all know, the triad is now on display in the South Asian Gallery of the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a loan thanks to the generosity of the new owner. My talk today will focus on 4 major issues surrounding the triad in relation to its provenance, date, religious significance, along with a connoisseur assessment. Let me start with the question of the place of its origin. The triad clearly came from the region of ancient India called Gandhara. The region is now located in northern Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan. Its boundary varied over time. During the period of occupation of the Persian Empire in the 6th and 5th centuries BC, Gandara seems to have encompassed the wide area from Taxila in the east to the Kabul Valley in the west. But in the first few centuries of the Common Era, when Gandharan art flourished, it often referred only to the Peshawar Valley. However, when referring to Gandhara as the area of the unfolding of a distinctive visual tradition, in which Buddhist themes are represented in the pseudo-classical style, originally derived from the Mediterranean world, we are usually thinking of a broader area from Taxila to Kabul, or sometimes as far as to Bamiyan in the further west. The term Greater Gandhara has recently begun to be used by scholars. It was actually a term invented by philologists to designate the area where Buddhist manuscripts were written in a language now named Gandhari, using a script called Kharoshthi, both of which were distinctive to the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. But the term has been commonly adopted by art historians as well. In Greater Gandhara, numerous images and relief carvings were carved in diverse materials such as stone, stucco, and clay, primarily during the first several centuries of the Common Era. Among them, the great majority of independent statues and stelaes made of stone in distinctive styles that we often identify with Gandharan arts, and as we see in the Met stele, were found in the northern part of the Peshawar Valley. So, the river passing from horizontally is the Kabul River that goes that flows all the way up from Kabul, and the northern part of the Kabul River is the kind of center of Gandharan art. We may say this geographic area was core part of Gandharan art. Here we find a number of important Buddhist monastery sites, such as Taktibai, Saribarul, Jamalgari, Sikri, Tareli, and Ranigat. These sites have yielded a large number of sculptures in stone through excavations, mainly conducted from the mid-19th century to the early 20th centuries. Among them, Taktibai stands out as the best preserved and best known sites. Only 2 kilometers away from Taktibai, located to the south, is a village called Saribaror. It appears to be a settlement with a long history and must have been an important town in this area during the period when Gandharan art flourished. So it was once surrounded by more than 10 monasteries. The place is marked with the orange, the place where the monasteries used to be located. They were generally small in size, must have been supported by the residents of the town and the nearby areas. All these monasteries completely disappeared a long time ago, probably in the early 20th century, after excavations were conducted by the then Archaeological Survey of India. The remains of Old Town are still visible. This is photos from the early 19th century. And the remains of the Old Town are still visible, although the mounds that used to cover the monastic structures are entirely gone. Both monastery at Taktibai and those Saribarol are the provenances of a number of stone images and steles. I consider to be among those of the highest quality in Gandharan art. The finds from Taktibai and Saribarol frequently show features indistinguishable from one another. It is clear that the same workshops were supplying dedication objects to the monasteries at these two places. These Buddhas from Taktibai and Saribarol reflect one of the major facial types commonly utilized in making Buddha images in Peshawar Valley during the early 3rd century AD. These are the major faces. I think they had such images as a kind of mental images, and they were replicating repeatedly. So we find these faces all poor replications. The Mestri was most likely dedicated at one of the monasteries at Saribaror. This attribution is supported by the fact that quite similar triads were discovered at two separate sites at Saribaror. Actually, the Mestri seems of higher quality than the other two examples in terms of craftsmanship and subtlety of expression. The three triads are identical in format and show significant similarities in the rendering of figural features, such as the hair and face. But these heads are slightly different from those we just saw in one of the previous slides. So you can see the differences. I cannot go in detail, unfortunately. In this type, one in the above, the hairs form symmetrically arranged curvilinear patterns. The eyes are more open, and the bulging part above the upper lip, where a mustache would originally have been painted, are more prominent. I believe that they are generally contemporary with, but slightly earlier than the hairs with wavy hairs and half-closed eyes that you see at the lower tier in this slide. We can find similar heads with variations in other images from Saribaror. Although they are also seen in some examples from other sites, such as Sikri, it might be reasonable to call them the Saribaror faces. Another notable aspect of the Met stele is its triad format. Small triad steles were quite popular as objects of dedication at monasteries at Saribaror. The close connection of the Mestili to Saribaror is apparent in the fact that such triads are relatively rare among the finds from Taktibai. This also points to Saribaror as the possible provenance of the Mestili. Or more safely, we can certainly say that it was produced in one of the workshops that supplied triad steles to Saribaror. The Mestili is inscribed with the dedication date of year 5. Dedicatory inscriptions, let alone those with dates, are rare in Gandharan sculpture. Out of well over 8,000 extant stone images and steles that represent Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, only a little more than 30 examples are inscribed. Among them, only 4, including our Met stele, carry the dedication dates. This contrasts markedly with dedicatory inscriptions on reliquaries. Reliquaries contain the Buddha's bone fragments and other supplementary offerings, and were usually installed inside Buddhist stupas. A recent study counted 406 extant reliquaries, and among these, 64 carry dedicatory inscriptions. Of these 64, 46 have dedication dates from the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD. This is a remarkably large number because the great majority of reliquaries are too small in size to accommodate inscriptions. Thus, we could say that virtually all the major reliquaries were inscribed with a record of their dedication. The dedication and installation of relics in a Buddhist stupa was an important event to be remembered, probably publicly, with an inscription. Compared with the relic dedications, the dedication of images by individual devotees seem to have been a more casual, private activity, and apparently inscribing images with a date was not the convention. Inscriptions were carved on images only on extremely rare occasions, probably when donors wanted to have a record of their acts inscribed. The dedication of Mass stele represents one of these exceptional instances. Still, the content of its inscription details the fact of its dedication with an aspiration for merit in a rather stereotyped format, also found in other image inscriptions. Then to what year does year 5 correspond in our reckoning of years? Like 3 other Buddha images, 3 other dated Buddha images, the inscription of the Mass stele lacks information about the era. The inscribed dates of the 3 other Buddhas are, as you can see here, 889, 318, and 384. On a stele from Mahamanederi, the second from the right, Mahamanederi stele, the inscribed year 89 is probably in the Kanishka era, which began in 127, 128 AD. Thus, stele can be securely dated to 215 AD. Years 318 and 384 are carved on the pedestals of 2 standing Buddha images, one from Lorientangi and the other from Pallatuderi. The Buddha from Pallatuderi was worshipped as a Hindu goddess at the time of its discovery in the late 19th century. Therefore, the head you can see here is not original, but from a different image. So you have to ignore the head. The Buddha image is lost, but its inscribed pedestal is in the British Museum. The dates of these 2 images have been problematic for a long time. However, recent studies have brought light to the Yona or Yavana era, Yona or Yavana meaning the Greeks in ancient India, which began around 174, 175 BC and seems to have been established during the period of Indo-Greek kingdom. Now it seems clear that years 318 and 384 are counted in the Yona era. Thus, 2 dates can be converted to 143 and 209 AD. From these dates, we can see that such Buddhas as Mahamanederi stele and Pallatuderi Buddha were made in the early 3rd century AD. Lorientangai Buddha, one in the far left, which has somewhat crude appearance, represents one of the earlier trends. As regards the Mass stele, i.e. the year 5 Buddha, most scholars agree that the dates was written in the Kanishka era. However, their opinions are divided as to whether it is the 5th year of the Kanishka or the 105th year of Kanishka, as there was a practice in the Kushan period of occasionally omitting the first digit in a figure larger than 100. Another minority opinion is that it refers to the 2nd Kanishka era, which may have started around 98 years of the original Kanishka era. In this case, the difference from the 105th year is minimal, only 2 years. If the date is the 5th year, that meant it was produced in 131 AD. If it is the 105th year, it was produced in 231 AD. I prefer the latter because I suspect that markedly different trends existed in the early 2nd century AD in Gandharan sculpture, as I will discuss now. A number of coins issued in the reign of Kanishka, which spans from 127 to 151 AD, these gold coins bear Buddha images on the reverse. Among them, gold coins, 6 altogether, are represented with Buddhas of a distinctive type. On the 2 coins shown, let me show you, in the center and right in this slide, 2 elements instantly catch our eyes. The mustache and the rendering of the hair in the upper part of the head in a form similar to snail shell curls. On the coin on the left, the surface is worn down, but we can mostly make out the piles of small round lumps that appear to be snail shell curls in the upper part of the head. It is clear that the Buddhas on Kanishka coins were designed with the knowledge of such actual Buddha images. This peculiar treatment of the hair is found in extant images. The number is small, but this is because this hairstyle was used only as an optional design, despite its prevalence on gold coins. As you can see here, this is confirmed by the fact that a Buddha head, one in the center, and the standing Buddha in the Asian Art Museum, Berlin, show identical features in the head and face, except for the hairstyle in the upper part of the head. Oh, I'm sorry, I had to explain this first. As you can see here, there are small number images that show snail shell curls only in the upper part of the head. So we can see this kind of actual images could have affected in the making of the designing Buddha images on gold coins. So now I mean this one. One can say they show identical features in head and face, except for the hairstyle in the upper part of the head. I have an explanation for the peculiar hairstyle you can see in the Buddha head in the center, but cannot discuss it on this occasion. No one can doubt that the 2 Buddhas were made in the same workshop, possibly even by the same hand. The 2 Buddhas were made around Kanishka's reign, the first half of the 2nd century AD. Other Buddhas that show similar features of mustaches and wide open eyes are most likely from the same period. They include something like this. They include the famous Bimaran reliquary in the left, which can be dated to the late 1st century based on the numismatic evidence, and narrative reliefs, as you can see in the right, that have been commonly attributed to the early phase of Gandharan art. This was a phase when the Iranian and nomadic elements were conspicuous within the overall mold of Hellenistic style. A bronze Buddha excavated, as you can see in the right, in a tomb dated to 158 AD in Shenyang, near Xi'an in China, last December, has been attracting the attention of many scholars. The Buddha is remarkably similar to Gandharan Buddhas of this phase. Thus, the 2nd century date for the newly found Buddha in China was no surprise to me at all. The new find just tells us that the transmission to China was very fast in this period. The mastili could not have been made in the same period as Gandharan Buddhas from the late 1st to mid-2nd century AD. It makes far better sense that the year 5 stele could be placed chronologically a century or so later. Mastili was most likely created in the first half of the 3rd century AD at roughly the same time as the year 380 for Buddha and the year 89 Buddha. This period, possibly starting in the late 2nd century, saw the emergence of a new stylistic types. larger stone statues were produced and dedicated in increasingly greater numbers, particularly in the Peshawar Valley. Compared with the earlier images, the craftsmanship became more assured and refined, though this brought schematization to a certain extent as well. I have felt there was an influx of fresh influence from the Mediterranean world during the late 2nd century AD. Elements in facial features that had been dominant in the earlier images, such as a mustache and wide open eyes, were initially maintained but gradually became less conspicuous. And also new iconographic elements such as Dharma Chakra Mudra, which means preaching gesture, and the full blossom lotus throne was introduced. So in this period, we find two primary types in the rendering of the hair and face, as you can see in these two dated Buddhas. Although I think the stele type precedes a little bit, although the inscribed date is a bit later. So these are the major faces in the first half of the 3rd century, the most prolific period in Gandharan Buddha images. Here I'd like to comment on practical but a delicate issue. Since the time when this trial was brought to the serious attention of scholars in the 1980s, many of them have expressed questions about its authenticity in varying degrees. The masterpiece is a work of extraordinary quality and is made even more valuable by its rare dated inscription. Scholars were also intrigued by an unusual iconographical motif, a small Buddha in the headdress of the Bodhisattva standing on the right. This motif has been commonly considered by Buddhist specialists as the primary sign for the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara in the tradition of later India and East Asia. And its presence in the stele might lead some specialists to identify such steles as the triad of Amitabha Buddha. However, simultaneously, a number of others have not been able to get away with apprehension about the piece. Concern was partly generated by alarming developments in the art market during the 1980s. This decade saw a dramatic increase in the number of Gandharan works for sale in the US, Europe, and Japan. Boosted by the bubble economy in Japan in the second half of the 1980s, Japanese collectors avidly purchased, supposedly from Gandara. The majority of the works on the market had not previously been known, and the considerable number didn't seem right to the eyes familiar with the works that can be trusted as authentic thanks to their acquisition in the early period, by the mid-20th century at the latest, or their documented discovery during excavations. The bewildering situation is highlighted by a Bodhisattva image that has sold for $375,000 and later became the object of an international scandal over whether it was authentic. This is still in the rich medical doctor who purchased this, but I heard in the middle of controversy, I heard he paid only the half. Some works even had inscriptions that epigraphy specialists believe were forged, indicating that there were those who were capable of forging inscriptions in the ancient language and script. This trend has continued to the present day. Gandharan art in the market over the last decades has been dominated by a large number of questionable pieces, often instantly disturbing because they bear so little resemblance to authenticated pieces. This is one on display. One in the right is in Karachi. They were confiscated in the middle of smuggling out from Pakistan at the port. So even something like these are acknowledged as fakes by Pakistani specialists. Although the photo in the left shows that other confiscated pieces, actually the Bodhisattva in the box in the upper part. But I think they are all considered fakes. So it was natural those who witnessed the situation developing in the 1980s and 1990s became extremely cautious in admitting works of unknown or obscure origin in the acknowledged corpus of Gandharan art. Many colleagues of my generation still maintain this stance. I had also had reservations about the triad for 20 years until I was finally able to examine it again in the 2007 exhibition of Gandharan art in Japan. It instantly looked right to me. Connoisseur judgment in visual arts is based on cumulative sensory and cognitive experience. Therefore, it is hard to articulate in verbal or analytical languages unless the problem concerns iconography. The faces in the triad in the upper tier perfectly fitted in my visual knowledge of Gandharan images. I found little particularly disturbing. Considering the quality of suspicious works newly shown on the market in the 1980s, it would have been impossible to make a work in such a convincing way around 1970 or earlier. Many of my colleagues also seem to have gained confidence once they saw it when it came to New York 2 years ago. Some specialists, such as Tanabe Katsumi and the late Francis Tissot, publicly raised questions about the triad as early as the late 1980s. One of the questions put forward by the two well-respected specialists was that while a Gandharan Buddha triad invariably consists of a Buddha and a pair of bodhisattvas, one turbaned and the other not turbaned, the turbaned bodhisattva was usually placed on the left side, unlike the mat triad, in which it is on the opposite side. However, I can cite numerous examples in which the position is reversed. Another question is that the mat triad is so similar to a triad in the Peshawar Museum. Pointing this out, Francis Tissot implies the possibility that mat triad is a modern copy of the Peshawar triad. However, in connoisseur judgment, the affinity to authenticated objects has been used in either way to support contradictory arguments. We sometimes question it because it's too similar, sometimes it's too different. So, well, that's our kind of destiny for art historians. The triads are similar in format, yet they are significantly different in expressions and details. Actually, mat triad is much better quality than the Peshawar triad. And also, in these facial types, there is one more useful and softer type, and the other look somewhat a bit more looking robust type. So the mat actually has a useful face. Yet another question was raised regarding the inscription. The Kharosthi script was written from the right to the left, just as with the Arabic script. On the mastly, the inscription is carved starting from the right end in a slanting way, avoiding the part cut out diagonally. This prompted some scholars to suspect the inscription had been added sometime after the completion of the stele. However, this cannot be the grounds for questioning its authenticity. It is more likely that the stone initially available for carving the stele was originally prepared in this manner, probably as a result of having to remove an irregular part. All the epigraphy specialists who examined the inscription, including my respected colleague, Stefan Baums, who is here, find it perfectly acceptable linguistically and paleographically. Furthermore, as pointed out by one of my colleagues in Gandhara philology, the word advadida in the inscription, which has been understood as meaning disease, had never previously been observed prior to being noticed on the mat stele. Yet the same word was found in two inscriptions discovered later. This also increases the likelihood that mat stele inscription is genuine. Considering all these, I'm 90% confident about the stele's authenticity. Why 90%? Because we still don't know the exact circumstances of its origin. Without knowing the exact circumstances, 90% may be the highest figure I can give. I've been calling the year 5 Buddhas a stele. This is because such triads were designed to stand independently. Unlike most of the narrative reliefs depicting the Buddha's life, which were typically attached to the walls of stupas with metal clamps. Majority of triad steles must have been installed inside a series of niches or storerooms for sculptures dedicated to monasteries. Or some of them could have been placed against the walls of stupas without being firmly embedded. Triad stele was a popular form of dedication in Gandara monasteries, especially in the Peshawar Valley, during the 3rd and 4th centuries. The triad stele type is usually comprised of a Buddha in the center, showing the so-called Dharma Chakra Mudra, the preaching gesture, seated on a full blossom lotus and flanked by 2 bodhisattvas. Between the Buddha and Bodhisattva are 2 similar smaller figures identified as Brahma and Indra, 2 celestial deities often paired in Gandharan art. They are obviously subsidiary figures attending to the Buddha in the center. This is why this type should be called a triad, despite the fact that there are 5 figures. Such triads were often identified as depicting the great miracle Ashravasti, an episode from the legendary life of Shakyamuni Buddha. The mastery was also described in the same way in the 1973 advertisement. This theme concerns a miracle that the Buddha performed at Shravasti to defeat the challenge of heretics through supernatural power by being seated on a 1,000-petal lotus and creating numerous doubles that are also seated on lotuses and fill the sky. However, this identification is no longer taken seriously by most scholars because there is little to support the identification in the visual configuration of such triad steles. What interests scholars most in the iconography of mass stele was the bodhisattva standing on the right. The term bodhisattva was originally a word used to designate the Buddha before enlightenment when he was practicing and accumulating merit to achieve Buddhahood during his last incarnation as a human and his numerous past lives. With the rise of innovative movement Mahayana, the term came to be used as an ideal and goal for Mahayana practitioners, and bodhisattvas who were believed to have reached the highest level were venerated like divinities. The 2 bodhisattvas in the mat triad are of different types, which can be distinguished by the inclusion of a turban. The one on the left who does not wear a turban is the type commonly identified as Maitreya. The bodhisattva in the mass stele must have held a water vessel, as in an image in Lahore Museum in the left. The one on the right places his left hand on his waist, as an image in Musée Guimet in Paris. This type is usually linked to the bodhisattva Siddhartha, because Prince Siddhartha depicted in narrative scenes, Buddha's life is often shown in the identical form. However, as for the bodhisattva on the right in the mat stele, a number of scholars suggested it might represent Avalokiteshvara due to a small Buddha in the headdress. Avalokiteshvara is indisputably the most popular bodhisattva in the Mahayana Buddhist world, worshipped for saving living beings from diverse hardships and helping them fulfill various practical wishes. The motif of small Buddha in headdress commonly appears in later images of Avalokiteshvara in India and East Asia. It is also found in a few images from Mathura of the Kushan period and several other images from Gandhara that can be trusted in authenticity. There is no question about identifying Avalokiteshvara in such images from later India and East Asia. However, it is not clear whether early Gandharan and Mathura examples can also be identified as such. In Gandara, a small Buddha was carved on a medallion attached to the turban of a bodhisattva. But we also find other motifs such as Garuda holding a Nagini in the same place in bodhisattva images. I doubt that such small motifs in the headdresses were presented as iconographic signs for the identity of specific bodhisattvas. It seems to me more likely that they simply signify that the bodhisattvas are destined to achieve Buddhahood. Therefore, I believe that the motif of a small Buddha in the headdress could have been employed for Siddhartha Bodhisattva in the early period, not necessarily for Avalokiteshvara as presumed according to the later usage. The textual account about Avalokiteshvara bearing a small Buddha in headdress appears in a sutra that was allegedly translated into Chinese during the 5th century AD, but is of dubious Indian origin. And the motif seems to have been established as an iconographic attribute for Avalokiteshvara images during the late 5th century in India and during the late 6th century in China. For these reasons, I find it difficult to readily agree that the Bodhisattva on the right in the mass stele should be identified as Avalokiteshvara. Moving a step forward from the identification of Avalokiteshvara, a number of scholars have aspired to see Amitabha Buddha in the mass stele. Amitabha Buddha is believed to reside in his Buddha field Sukhavati in the west, where his devotees are said to be reborn and enjoy a pleasurable and carefree life. The Amitabha cult, commonly called Pure Land Buddhism, has been extremely popular in East Asia and is still dominant in contemporary Japanese Buddhism. In East Asia, images of Amitabha were frequently made in a triad form, together with two bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshvara and Mahasdharmaprabhupada. This is why some scholars were prompted to think that on the grounds of possible presence of Avalokiteshvara in the triad, the mass stele might represent the Amitabha triad. They were thrilled at this possibility because little substantive evidence has been found for Mahayana or the Amitabha cult in India, despite the fact that the Indic language scriptures of Amitabha and Sukhavati were translated into Chinese many times in the first several centuries of the Common Era. Even before the discovery of the mass stele, some Japanese scholars had already noted the resemblance of Gandharan Buddha triad to Amitabha triad from Japan or China. To many scholars, the mass stele seems to provide a positive piece of evidence for Amitabha images in Gandhara, which they suspected might have been the place of origin for the cult of Amitabha in India. However, this presumption raises a number of questions. First, the identification of Avalokiteshvara in the mass stele is not at all clear. Second, even though a number of Avalokiteshvara images bearing a small Buddha in the headdress have been found in India from the late 5th century onward, no single example of Amitabha triad has been identified in sculptural painting from India. In India, Avalokiteshvara is always paired with Maitreya or Vajrapani, not with Mahasdharmaprabhupada, the usual companion in the Amitabha triad. Third, the Amitabha triad, as we see in East Asia, was most likely established as an iconographic type in China only in the late 6th century. I believe that the Amitabha triad type in East Asia was an iconographic invention that originated in China, not the adoption of the earlier Indian type of the Amitabha triad. In a paper I expect to be published this year in a fast volume for the Buddhist scholar Gregory Chopin, I discuss why I doubt the presence of the images of Amitabha and Sukhavati in India. To me, the aspiration by some of my colleagues in Buddhist studies and Buddhist art to search for Amitabha in India seems a projection of our knowledge of East Asian examples, especially those in Japanese tradition, because Amitabha Pure Land Buddhism is so prominent still in Japan. Recently, John Guy wrote an excellent introduction to multiple religious significance of this type in a short article published in Orientations. Though I don't entirely agree with his interpretation, it would be a nice supplement to my discussion here. In my view, the triad type was, as we see in the mass stele, was a popular convention for sculptural dedication in Gandhara monasteries. The triad type is a simple assemblage of a Buddha and two Bodhisattvas in a single image without any association with specific Buddhas. I even wonder whether there was any intention of specifying Bodhisattvas by name. Rather, they may represent ideas or ideals. They may have symbolized two different aspects of ideas we associate with Mahayana Bodhisattvas. One as a mendicant practitioner, the other as a practitioner who actively engaged in the mundane world. The Buddha is seated on a full blossom lotus, which has nothing to do with Amitabha's paradise Sukhavati, unlike the popular conception that the lotus seat is a distinctive attribute of Amitabha. The textual accounts of Sukhavati hardly describe the lotus seat in connection with Amitabha, as I recently discussed in the work I mentioned. It was more likely an iconographic convention newly created for the imagery of Amitabha in China. The lotus seat in the triad stele has a more generic meaning as a symbol of the Buddha's supramundane nature and supernatural power. As I suggested in my previous work, it is quite likely that images of this type in which the lotus is highlighted or popular type of votive dedications for Mahayana Buddhists. Apparently, the triad type was transmitted to India proper in the south and gained enormous popularity as a sculptural dedication in Buddhist cave temples in the Western Deccan during the 5th and 6th centuries. Amitabha triad in East Asia may also have been inspired by parallel images from Gandhara, but their identification as Amitabha most likely originated in China. I regret I cannot discuss this complex problem in further detail because my time is already up. As I discussed so far, the year 5 Buddha is remarkable in many ways. It captures the ideal images of enlightened one and practitioners at the highest level in Buddhism in most subtle form, following the hybrid artistic tradition transmitted from the Western classical world. Though small, it can be said confidently to be among the finest extant works in Gandharan art. Probably having originated in the heart of Gandharan art, it is also highly valuable for providing us with a definite chronological point in the most productive period in the creation of Gandharan Buddha images. I would like to congratulate the Metropolitan Museum of Art on being able to publicly exhibit such a historically or artistically important masterpiece, and laud the generosity of its owner providing a great opportunity for academics and art lovers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ree, for that wonderfully stimulating and rich lecture. There's much to discuss, and this, I'm afraid, will not be the forum for it. But we do have the benefit of Professor Stefan Worms, who will respond to the presentation this afternoon. Professor Worms is a lead researcher in Buddhist manuscripts from Gandhara project at Maximilian University in Munich, editor of the Dictionary of Gandhari, and one of the few scholars in the world working on the inscriptions and manuscripts of the greater Gandharan region. So I now quickly invite Professor Worms to the podium to respond to Professor Ree's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to John Guy for the kind introduction, and to him and to Juhyung for letting me add some epigraphic side notes to the wonderful talk that we just heard introducing this piece. Next, I wonder how to go forward. Green. I will keep my notes brief. I think I have about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So to briefly revisit the inscription, in contrast to Professor Rhee, I'm not an art historian, I'm an epigrapher. And when you show a beautiful piece of art to an epigrapher, this is what he sees. So let's focus on it just for a little moment. And many of the points have, of course, already been mentioned, but I will try to just bring them together here. So in general, we have 2 types of inscriptions on Buddhist sculpture. Some of them are label inscriptions that refer to the object themselves. So they might name the Buddha being depicted, for instance, Dipankara, for instance. We have a few examples. And others do not. Others are just simple donative inscriptions that tell you which name would like to be associated with this, but that do not refer to the sculpture themselves. So as we already saw, this is the second type. The inscription itself does not refer to the sculpture at all. The layout, as you see, is rather informal. There's not a great deal of planning that went into it. So in the beginning of the inscription on the right, letters are squeezed together, and then as the inscriber realizes there is actually plenty of space left, on the left, he spaces them out more. There are examples of very carefully planned inscriptions that go circularly, where the end meets the beginning and so on, especially on the relic containers of earlier centuries, but this is not one of them. And in fact, the lotus stalk in the middle, as you see, interrupts the inscription in the middle of a word. Then the corner has already been mentioned, so the bottom right corner, which I invite you to investigate yourself on the original piece. And this is a rather complicated situation. So Professor Rhee already said that the inscription seems to start a little bit higher to avoid some issue in this corner. Yet at the same time, the corner as we have it now actually cuts through the middle of the first letter, the letter Sa for year, for Sangvatsara. And the only way that I can really explain this is that there was some issue in the stone, then they added the inscription at a later point, and we don't know. Since the inscription doesn't refer to the piece, it might have been added quite a bit later, actually. And after it had been added, a clean cut was made to stabilize the piece. And this could even have happened in modern times. This could even have happened as it was found or traded. So this nice cut that you see at the bottom there, cutting through the letter. Paleographically speaking, this may very well be from the 3rd century. There are 2 or 3 test letters in the Koroshti script that allow you to date pieces of writing, particularly the letter S and the letter K. The forms of the letter S and the letter K that we see here are already existent in the 1st century CE, but inscriptions are inherently conservative. So the same forms may very well occur in the 2nd or even 3rd century. So the writing is compatible with the dating that Professor Rhee proposed. Now, running through it very quickly, as we saw, it is the year 5. And as we heard, it can be the year 5 for 105 of the Kushan era, or it could actually also refer to the Greek era. So it could be the year 405 of the Greek era. And this is not coincidental, because scholars have argued that the Kushan era of 127 CE is actually a re-inauguration of the Greek era of 300 years earlier, which was part of the cultural program of the Kushanas, which utilized Hellenism as an imperial symbol. And you see this in the art, of course, in the form of the art. You also see it in the year. Moving on, you could in principle also see it in the name of the month. So the month is Falgun, the very month on whose last day we are today. So 2 weeks and a number of years ago, this inscription was written. There's a parallel system of Greek names for the months in which this would be Dystrios. So they use those exchangeably. Moving on to the day day 5 is interesting because it is not an important day in the Buddhist monastic ritual calendar. Most of the relic inscriptions are dedicated on the 8th, the 15th, and so on of the month. This one is not. So the day 5 may have held a personal significance to whoever donated this inscription, maybe related to the the parents who are mentioned at the end. It could possibly, I mean, just speculating, be, for instance, an anniversary of their decease. Moving on, the name Buddhananda. Buddha Nanda or Buddha Ananda is a rather common Buddhist name, so this doesn't tell us much, except it is a monastic name. So the inscription was dedicated by a monk. And this monk was a master of the 3 Pitakas, that is, of the entire Buddhist canon. As we heard, I would just like to add that this is the only Kharoshthi inscription in which this title occurs. We know it from other places in India, but only here in Gandhara. And it attests to a particular stage in the development of the Buddhist canon. So now we are at a point where actually there was a notion of a complete canon in 3 baskets that a single person could master. So for that reason, this title is also very important. Then a very minor detail, which I just noticed recently, there are 2 types of N in this inscription, and the N of the word for donation, dana mukhe, is different from the other Ns. So this usually does not happen, and this usually should not happen, because every scribe uses only one type of N. Does this mean it's a forgery now? No, I don't think so, not necessarily, because we know that these, especially private donative inscriptions, consisted of building blocks which were sort of reutilized, put back together by whoever inscribed this, and he may well have had different models utilizing the 2 different types of N. So sigh of relief, this is okay, I think. And coming to the very last part then, the expression of honor to mother and father, of course, also demonstrates the continuing connections that Buddhist monastics held to their families. So there was no clear cut where you rejected the family in the sense that you never talked to them. Of course not. You maintain ties, and you might even donate a very nice sculpture to them, like here. And finally, the word Advaita, as we heard, occurs in only 2 other inscriptions which were not known when this one was found. So the word Advaita, who have passed on, was basically unforgeable in the 1970s, and this, I think, is the very strongest argument that the inscription is genuine. Now, you can, of course, have forged inscriptions on genuine pieces, but you cannot have a genuine inscription on a forged piece. So by implication, this sculpture is also genuine. And then maybe just 2 points in 2 more minutes. First of all, I like the idea proposed that this is not Amitabha. So first of all, if this was Sukhavati, I think all of these people should be emerging from lotuses. They should be reborn from lotuses in Sukhavati, and this is not happening here. Only the middle Buddha is sitting on a lotus, and as Professor Ree rightly pointed out, the lotus is a general symbol for the immanence yet transcendence of Buddhas. And this is expressed in many places in Buddhist literature. I think Etienne Lamotte, the Belgian scholar, pointed it out in connection with this sculpture already. And what I give you here is a manuscript from the 1st century, so a little bit older than the sculpture, from Gandara, that I happen to work on, which has a verse in there expressing just this, about our Buddha, about the Buddha Shakyamuni. So the Buddha Shakyamuni in this case, as the water lotus, thorny and waterborne, is not soiled by water and mud, so the sage, Shakyamuni, speaking of calmness and not greedy, is not soiled by desires in the world. So he's in the world, but he's not soiled by it. And this could very well be a visual expression of that very thought. So this could be a generic Buddha, or it could even be our Buddha, Shakyamuni. And yes, at the very end, I just wanted to put this stele next to another one that hasn't been mentioned so far yet. So the one that you see on the right is in the Ringling Museum in Florida. It has no date. It may be from around the same time as the one that we have been discussing tonight. And it also has an inscription. And this inscription raises the possibility that even though this is probably not Amitabha and probably not Sukhavati, the Buddha on the right might still be Avalokiteshvara, combined then probably with Maitreya on the left, not, as we heard, not with Mahastama Prapta. And the simple reason for that is that the inscription in the Ringling piece, which appears to have been a triad about half the size of the one that the Metropolitan Museum has, but it's now damaged, so we only have the Buddha on the right. So the reason is that this is a label inscription. So this inscription does refer to what is depicted, and it says this is the Ulu Ishvara in the Gandhari language. And Ulu Ishvara can really only mean Avalokeshvara, which is a form of the name Avalokiteshvara. Incidentally, here the turban figure is on the right. showing that Tissot and Tanabe were not correct in insisting that there was a problem. And also the figure on the right in the Ringling sculpture has something that we cannot discuss for lack of time in his turban. It doesn't seem to be Buddha, it's this highly stylized sort of triangular thing. So maybe this could be a subject of later discussion. But he holds a lotus in his hand. So this is another argument for this actually being Avalokiteshvara. So to conclude, then if you put these two pieces next to each other, as a layman in art historical terms, it seems possible to me that in the middle in our piece we have a generic Buddha or even Shakyamuni surrounded by maybe Avalokiteshvara and Maitreya.
Thank you, Dr. Boms, for that wonderful and subtly presented revisiting of some of these questions. I think there's so much to discuss, and tonight will sadly not be the forum for that. I want to just now thank you all for being here, especially to thank Professor Boms and our distinguished speaker, Professor Rhee, who deserves a special round of applause. And finally, just to thank you all and to invite you to visit our galleries, especially the South Asian galleries, and view the work that's been under discussion tonight. Thank you very much.